We good?
Yes.
Sorry about that. Yes. Yeah. So if you don't mind, just a quick background on your early days.
Well, I started cartooning at the age of 6 when I opened my parents' New Yorker magazines and I saw my future. That's what I really wanted to do. For years as a kid, I would draw cartoons and snip them out and then scotch tape them into the New Yorkers over the cartoons that were there. But along the way, my parents had a different plan for me. So I had a kind of academic career until I dropped out of graduate school at Harvard in 1969, at which point I declared myself a cartoonist. I pretty soon was appearing every week in a newspaper called the Boston Phoenix, which was sort of the Village Voice-y type newspaper in Boston. And I had a slot there for over 30 years. And I was in many other magazines, but I could not crack the Holy Grail. 25 years before I sold my first cartoon to the New Yorker. That was heralded by the arrival of the immortal Bob Menkoff, who was a fan of my work and immediately started buying my stuff. And I have been in there ever since. That was in 1998. And I think I published around 700 cartoons, 100 less or 180 less than I listened to, what's his name from Memphis, that you guys
Frank
interviewed.
Gotham?
Frank Gotham, yes.
Mhm.
I hear he had 880. I'm only around 700.
Only. If we could back up a minute on that story, I heard something today getting ready for this podcast, a cute story about you watching a show and tell in kindergarten or first grade with a New Yorker cartoonist, and you saying that you wanted to be a cartoonist. Can you tell us that story?
Yeah, it was actually in 4th grade, and they had like a career day for elementary school children, and a cartoonist from the New Yorker came. I don't know who it was, and he did this incredible thing where he would have a kid come up and draw crazy squiggles on a big pad, and then he would step back and he turned the pad this way and that, and then he turned the squiggles into something, and then the something into a cartoon. And I was my mouth was open. I said to myself, this is amazing. It's the best magic trick I've ever seen. And afterwards I went up and I shook his hand and I said, I'm going to be a New Yorker cartoonist too. That's the story.
It's a little surprising.
Fantastic.
What did you like about New Yorker cartoons at that age? Because I imagine you didn't get 90% of them.
Well, actually I was very, very smart and I got 74% of them. But I liked them because they looked easy to do. They didn't involve color. They weren't too complicated. I lived near the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and I used to go there with my mother and look at the art, and it was wonderful, but man, it just looked so hard to do. The cartoons looked easy, so I could started drawing right away, and that part appealed to me. And I lived in New York. I recognized that a lot of the cartoons were about the city that I lived in, not necessarily the martini drinking upper class crowd that was often pictured, but in the Steigs and some of the others, I saw some images I recognized and ideas I understood. And above all, Steinberg influenced me, not because of anything else except the amazing things he did with lines. And that fascinated me and made me think, wow, lines are just amazing. Actually, right behind me here is my proudest possession, my original Saul Steinberg drawing. So,
Very
oh, wow.
nice.
Does that answer that question?
Were you also interested in cartoons that typical kids would be interested in? Like more like comic strips?
Well, my father's forbade us to have comic books in the house. He thought they were the source of delinquency, perversion, and other awful things. So I only got to see them mainly at the barbershop, where they were in a pile next to the girly magazines, as we call them. And I loved them. And the only comics I got to see were the Sunday Herald Tribune we got. And I fell in love with The Little King by Otto Sogolo, who in fact was a New Yorker artist. But mainly they also look too complicated for me. I really love that simple line drawing that I still do today that I saw in the magazine.
Yeah. I know the answer, but what did you go to Harvard for to study?
I was in a graduate program in something called Soviet Studies, but I was mainly interested in Russian history. Yeah.
When I read, I assume that plan then is to teach it. I mean, I don't know what else you would do with that degree.
It was my father's plan more than mine. And I think the idea would be I would be a diplomat or a professor, a hotshot lawyer, even the president, something that my father could stand behind his counter in his jewelry store and proudly announce to any customers that came in. Cartoonist was not one of those things. Yeah.
Did he encourage it once you became, at least in the early days, semi-successful, with the Boston comic strip and the other places you were selling?
No, till his dying day, he was saying, "You sure you don't want to go back to your Russian history?" But I mean, I can tell you the story. The first cartoon I sold to the magazine, and you probably already heard this, but I'll repeat it. The cartoon sold in October 1997, and that was probably the second best day of my life after the day I met my wife. And I got really excited and I called my wife and then I called my dad. And for once in all those years, he knew the New Yorker was something special. And so he finally expressed some amount of pride in me. So then a week went by, another week went by, and my father was picking up the phone saying, "David, I got my New Yorker, you're not in it." After a while, he was saying, "David, are you sure you sold that cartoon?" What happened, which I didn't know, and a lot of cartoonists learn eventually, is that when you sell a cartoon has nothing to do with when it appears in the magazine. And in fact, that cartoon from October didn't appear until July. And by then my father had died. And so he never got to see it, which was really, really unfortunate.
Mm. And what was that first cartoon?
It was a meditation class, and there's like a guru up front, and there's a sign that says "The Journey to Enlightenment," and one of the students is raising her hand and saying, "Are we there yet?" And that, in a way, is kind of eloquent about my journey of all those years. I was finally there with that cartoon. So,
what's amazing is I just pulled it up, and your style really has not changed much.
No,
from
the
that cartoon to today.
Not really. I still draw the same way. I still have this desire to have things look really direct and spontaneous. And if there are slips of the pen, I leave them in. I just like things to look rough and ready.
So with that said, do you send roughs, and that's, there's no final, what you send to them at the outset as a rough is your finished take on it?
I would accept that, you have to do a high resolution version, a good version on good paper for a finish. And so I tend to redraw them. And sometimes they look just like the rough, sometimes a little different. But I think if you just looked at the two drawings together, you couldn't tell which was the rough and which was the finish.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great style. I like that style. It's similar to how Michael Maslin does it. I like that just quick look to it.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
It's okay. I was going to say, did you have any art training at all, or is this just a natural ability that you have and developed?
I'm self-taught, and I was a quote unquote serious artist for about 20 years. I had another career as a sculptor, which I abandoned at some point because I wasn't very happy doing it. But in the process, I studied a lot of art on my own, not taking classes, but I looked at artists who I admired. I found certain artists that I modeled my drawing after a little bit. So I was aware of a lot of art stuff, but I never had any specific training.
Mm-hmm. I read or heard that there was a story behind your cartoon of the man pointing at a scribbly looking dog that says "bad drawing."
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
Yes. Well, early on when I was first in the magazine, that was a time when magazines were pretty flush, and the New Yorker had these amazing parties. And they were sort of celebrity marathons of intellectual types. So you'd go and there's Philip Roth over there, and you look over there and there's Salman Rushdie and stuff like that. And I went to my first one, and I stood there with my drink, just flabbergasted that I actually found myself there. And at some point I saw a group of older cartoonists, some of whom were my heroes, and over by the bar. And then one of them extricated himself from the group and came kind of stumbling across the floor with his drink sloshing this way and that, and came up to me and he said, "I know who you are." I said, he knows who I am. It's fantastic. And he said, you don't belong in the New Yorker. What do you draw with, a stick? And as you can imagine, I was pretty devastated. But I dealt with it by going back to my studio late at night, sitting down at my desk and drawing a cartoon that was later the lead cartoon in that year's cartoon issue. Mm-hmm. And it's a guy, well drawn for me, pointing to a really badly drawn dog for me, saying, "Bad drawing." And that's how that story happened. Yeah.
It's a great cartoon. I love that one.
Thank you.
So how many cartoons do you think you submitted before you actually sold one in that 25 years? Were you doing 10 a week during that time?
No, I mean, you can't. I mean, I knew that I would never feel good about myself if I didn't get in that magazine. But even knowing that was not enough to drive me to do 10 a week for 25 years. But yeah. Every month I would submit once or twice, sometimes 10, sometimes 20, whatever I could come up with that I knew I would later send to other publications. And so it's a lot of cartoons and a lot of rejection. But what's funny is once I was in the magazine, I've revisited many of those and redraw them a little bit and resubmitted them, and a lot of them have gotten published in the magazine.
Okay. That's
what was the process like when you were you getting any type of feedback, or were you just mailing them in?
I just mailed them in, and and then when I moved back I lived in Boston from 1968 to 1983, and then I moved back to New York, and I started going to the Look Day Tuesday mornings. But if you weren't in the magazine, you weren't allowed to go through the inner sanctum to see Lee Lorenz. I just had to hand my envelope of precious babies to the receptionist, and then you'd come back on Friday and he would hand it back to you. And then I would stand by the elevator and I'd say a little prayer. Then I'd open it up and there's my rejection slip, week after week, not a word, no feedback, no nothing. But in the process, I got to meet all the wonderful New Yorker cartoonists who have become my friends, and that was really important to me. And the thing was weird was that I'm not a totally confident person about a lot of things, but I am about my cartoons. And I always thought, it's not my problem, it's their problem. Someday they're going to figure out that these are good. I just have to bide my time. And so I kept submitting. And then fortunately, Bob came along.
When you sold to Bob, you still had not sat down face to face with Bob or Lee to kind of discuss?
I'd never sat down. I'd never met Lee. I met Lee several years after I was in the magazine. He did an event at a museum here, and I was on the stage with a couple of other people. And he said he doesn't remember seeing any of my cartoons. So that was pretty weird. And
that's disheartening. You don't even know if they're getting seen.
I'm sure he did, and he was praising me to the skies at this thing. And so that was weird. But as far as Bob went, I knew Bob. We hung out together at the lunches after the Look Day before I was in the magazine, and he had the Cartoon Bank going, and I did pretty well at the Cartoon Bank. And so I knew Bob. I sat down with him once or twice at the beginning, and then I never did again, because I discovered that for me personally, being judged in person in real time was not something it just never, it made me too anxious. So, and Bob has a way of doing things. He looked through your drawings and never crack a smile, never say, and maybe he'd talk about the Yankees while he was doing it. And so I just decided it didn't make any difference. I just put them on the pile on the assistant editor's desk, as did other people, and let the drawings stand for themselves. And pretty quickly, I started appearing a lot, and Bob was buying a lot. And I figured, well, that's the way I'm going to do it forever.
Mm. Were you surprised when he was named cartoon editor? Because it said that at that point you probably had known him, right, from the lunches that I think you were going to at the time.
I was surprised. I mean, I think everyone was surprised, and everyone was wondering who was it going to be. Tina Brown was pretty ruthless, and we just didn't know. But as soon as I heard it was Bob, I felt like, wow, that I'm in. I can get in. I feel certain of that. And it really, just a month or two after he started, that he bought the first one.
And then you were selling a lot, like you say, after that. It wasn't, you sold one, then had to wait another 2 years. It was kind of off to the
it went
races.
fast and furious after that. I'm really grateful to him. He is a remarkable mind as far as cartoons goes. Nobody knows more about them than Bob, and I really respect that about him. And he made my career, so I'm incredibly grateful to him for that.
Yeah. And now, how is it with Emma? Have you went and sat down with her, or you still just submit the same way?
I submit the same way. I know Emma. I've met her many times, but I don't go for the in-person look. So and these days, like everyone, nobody brings them in anymore. I've just emailed my roughs the whole time since she took over in 2017.
Do you miss that meeting up with the other cartoonists?
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame. What happened was that the magazine moved from Midtown down to the World Trade Center, and it just wasn't as convivial an area, a place where we used to go to this wonderful restaurant in the theater district. Maybe other people have told you about it, called the Pergola des Artistes. And what was wonderful about it was a French restaurant, and they had an $8.95 lunch special, and the crucial thing was a free glass of wine. So the cartoonists loved the place. It was really friendly, and you'd get sometimes 30 people at a table, and you'd get the great old guys like George Booth or Mort, and then you'd get new people like Drew Dernovich and Ben Schwartz and people like that. And so it was a great mix of people. But once they moved down to the World Trade Center, there just wasn't the same kind of atmosphere available. And then COVID happened, and once that happened, I don't know anyone who's been in the office. So things have really changed. But I do miss those days. Absolutely.
How about I know you were doing the daily cartoon for a while, and particularly during Trump's reign.
Yeah, I actually listened to your interview with Ben Schwartz, who talked about that as well. That was an amazing challenge. It was difficult at times, but it was also really interesting. I was the first one, started I think in 2014. And at that time, I think I was on for like 2 or 3 months. And every day you had to get your idea in and ready to go by 8 a.m. And I always thought of myself as a person who needs a lot of time and a lot of preparation, but I discovered that the deadline kind of focused the mind. And so I found I really started to enjoy that pressure. And what was interesting about it too was that eventually when you did it for like 2 or 3 months, you started feeling like the audience knew who you were, and you were kind of having a conversation with them every day. So every cartoon didn't have to be a slam dunk. It could just continue that conversation. But and then the real highlight was during the 2016 election, when I again did it for a long time. And there was a lot of Trump stuff. But I think I did listen to what Ben said, and I agree. You get sick and tired of drawing Trump. And there's only so many Trump drunk jokes you can make. There's a wonderful cartoon by can't remember who did it, but it's a cartoonist at his desk, and his wife is standing in the door. It's Robert Levy, And
Yeah.
the wife is saying, that Trump cartoon you just did, it just happened, or something like that,
Yeah.
because things were so crazy that he was a living cartoon anyway.
Mhm.
So
Yeah. It's interesting to me that your cartoon of the king that says, I'm concerned about my legacy, kill the historians, was not drawn during the Trump years.
no, it wasn't. That was a
Yeah.
George W. Booth cartoon.
Mhm.
Yeah, the king is a very useful thing for
Mhm.
me. I've been able to, I don't like drawing caricatures. I'm not very good at it. So I always use something like a king to represent the person in power or government itself.
Mhm. Yeah, it's
And
brilliant.
I like it better that way. I
Mhm.
went through a bunch of your political cartoons, and the ones that don't include Trump directly are the best ones, I think. Seems like when you do draw him, you kind of just draw the back of his head. You got kind of the shape of his hair is
Yeah,
kind of the way you
exactly.
went about it.
You know, the New Yorker, there, and it's much more so now. They're not doing much political cartooning these days, except on the cover, really. And even the daily cartoon now is not political particularly. It's topical. It's about, you know, if it's November, it's about autumn leaves. If it's February, it's about Valentine's Day. I mean, it's that kind of a thing, less political. And so I don't have as much interest in doing it, but the 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 New Yorker has always kind of shied away from what they think of as editorial cartoons, where you have caricatures. Maybe you have a sign saying this person is a Democrat or something like that.
Mhm.
And they don't. And I don't think the editors really like you to hit things over the head politically. They like you to kind of go at it sideways and say, you know, this is how we feel about what's going on, not about what's going on itself. And I liked that. That really worked for me. So that my political cartoons tend to reflect that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it makes them more evergreen also. I mean, if you used George Bush or even Donald Trump in that cartoon about the king, you know, killing the historians, it would just be set in that time period and it would be funny, but it wouldn't last forever like this one is.
I agree completely. It's not something I consciously thought of, you know, that
Mhm.
this will last forever. It was more just a way. I liked the thing. The point of a cartoon, political, as far as I'm concerned, or any other, is it to be funny.
Mhm.
If it's not funny, then it's not working for me. And so things are actually, I think, a lot funnier when you do something like use a king. It just adds a certain funniness that I always appreciate.
Mhm.
Yeah. You think there's fewer political cartoons now just because, as the New Yorker, they're a little more hesitant to insult the Democratic Party than the Republican Party? I
No.
suspect that's the case, but do you disagree?
Yeah, because this started during the Trump administration, and it's continued only because I don't know. I have no insight into what goes on in the opaque minds of the people that run the magazine. I just don't know, but I suspect that they just don't, that there's just so much other political stuff that the magazine produces, and all of it great, including like Barry Blitz covers, that maybe they just decided that they don't need the cartoons to add on to that. But I don't know.
And maybe we just got burnt out after Trump. We just did not want to see any more political cartoons.
It could be, yeah.
Well, I like the less overt ones. I mean, there's one that you did that's a captionless cartoon of a man hiding behind an armchair in his living room with the dog carrying the newspaper in, and the man is scared. He's hiding.
Yeah.
He's afraid of the newspaper. And I mean, that's really funny. And I mean, that could have been during any administration also, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I equate it to the Trump years, but somebody else may equate it, you know, to.
Well, there's a war
Clinton
going
years,
on
or-
right
yeah,
now.
exactly.
And so, you know,
Yeah.
I think what that cartoon I tried to accomplish with a cartoon like that is that I talked about this before. I think my humor depends a lot on putting out something that I feel, like in that case, anxiety about the news,
Mhm.
not about the news itself, as I was saying before, but about my anxiety about it. And when the reader, who has also experienced that anxiety, sees themselves in the drawing, that's when the humor happens. And I depend a lot on that approach.
Yeah, you described in another interview, I think maybe the 60 Minutes interview, where you mentioned just that feeling of coming up with a cartoon that you just know is gold the minute you think of it.
Yeah.
How rare is that for you? Does that happen
Well,
fairly?
there's every week you're doing 10 ideas. So, and not all of them are gold. And in fact, what you're referring to is these ones that happen when you're not expecting it to happen, when you're focused on something else. The story I like to tell is that a few years ago, I was sitting in my studio determined to do a cartoon about the situation in the Middle East, which was blowing up for the millionth time. And I tried and I couldn't come up with anything. So finally I said, okay, I'll take a break and have lunch. And I had a bunch of takeout menus, and I had one from the King Tut Cafe. And I was looking at it and I went, oh yeah. And the cartoon I drew was an Arab and a Jew sitting on a bench. And the Jew is saying, why don't we focus on the things that unite us, like falafel? And that moment of unexpected cartoon that it almost feels like it happens to you, not like you thought it up. And when that happens, that's when I get that almost physical sensation that you're talking about, a real thrill. And that nothing beats that. And it keeps me doing what I do.
Mm-hmm. Is that how you come up with most of your ideas? You'll come up with the idea and then draw it, as opposed to, I know there's some cartoonists who literally just start drawing and see what comes to them.
I do that sometimes. Sometimes I do a lot of out in the world listening. I have something I think of as my cartoon brain. I have my regular brain and then my cartoon brain, and it's never entirely shut off. And in every situation I'm in, there's a little part of me that's trying to see if there's something funny in this, and some of them come that way, and a lot of them come just the way that one did, through a process of sitting alone in the studio at my desk, kind of meditating and trying to see what flies into my brain. So it's all kind of ways, not one or the other.
Do you have a favorite trope that you like to draw, or is it just anything that comes?
Like it's pretty much anything, until COVID started, I was doing lots of death cartoons because I enjoy those, but I don't know if you've noticed, but there hasn't been a Grim Reaper in the magazine in about 2.5 years.
Oh, wow.
So those are kaput right now.
Yeah, I didn't
like
notice
everyone,
that, but now that you say it,
Yeah.
Wow.
We had one in the contest a year ago, so there was one there.
There was one in the contest? You're right.
Yeah, there's a Death with Lemons.
Oh, right.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah, you're right. But there used to be at least one or two a month.
Right. Fairly.
I loved playing with the death figure. That's probably my favorite trope.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't use that one right now. I got to go to the desert island.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing that so much can be taken from the death trope. You'd think that would be done by now, but no, there's always something fresh there, which is always ironic.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you make something funny out of something that scares people, you really hit the jackpot. And I think that's what's so great about the Grim Reaper cartoons, is that you're making something funny out of the scariest possible thing. Mm-hmm. And I think people really appreciate and enjoy that. They like to see their fears made fun of. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's one that you have with the Grim Reaper sitting on a sofa in between a couple, and they're both asking each other if they feel okay.
Yeah, are you okay?
Are you okay?
Yeah, you're right. You do have quite a few of those. I remember the one that Death shows up and just has a save the date slip.
Yeah, that's right. Don't freak out. It's just to save the date. Yeah.
Oh, that's so awesome.
My favorite, though, is the one where Death is a guy at a desk at his computer, and Death is standing there, and the guy says, "Thank goodness you're here. I can't accomplish anything without a deadline."
Yeah,
that's my favorite.
Yeah, yeah, that's for me too. I can't do anything without the deadline. So
Oh, that's fantastic.
Speaking of the caption contest, I don't think you've had too many in the caption. I know of at least one.
I think I've had 3 or 4 in 24 years. Bob once tried to explain it to me. I asked him why they don't use more of mine, and it was kind of a weird thing. I couldn't tell if it was a compliment or an insult, but he said, well, your cartoons are too good for the caption contest. And I said, oh, what do you mean? He said, well, they're already complete ideas. There's no room for the caption contest, something like that. And so I did 3 or 4, and I can tell you that with the exception of one, the winning caption was the caption that I had originally handed in with the cartoon.
Oh, wow.
Really?
Which
yeah,
is
so
pretty amazing to me. Like there's a guy climbing an empty space. He has a climber's helmet and an outfit on. He's climbing the empty space, and he's saying to the guy on the ground, because it's not there.
Yeah.
And that was my caption, and that
Wow.
was the caption that won. So
yeah, so your cartoons are a complete idea. There's a certain caption that will go with that cartoon, and there's
Yeah.
nothing you can do about it. It just works that way.
Yeah.
yeah, I think so. I mean, it's a kind of a mystery, and a lot of times the caption contest is really good for new people too, because it gives them a way of making a little money where they might not have sold otherwise. And so I don't mind. I mean, I feel really good that I think the caption contest has, lost my earphone. I think the caption contest has done more for what we do than just about anything. It really connected people to what we do and gave people a sense. At the beginning, we were all worried, well, the people will think it's so easy and this and that. But really what it did was it showed people how we think. And I think that just created more and more of an audience for New Yorker cartoons.
Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. I've said the same thing many times.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it makes people aware of who you are as a cartoonist, as opposed to who Drew is or who Frank Cotham is, or, like people see the cartoons and they are paying attention to it and thinking about it and recognizing recognizing who you are as a cartoonist, as opposed to, now how the daily cartoon is. There's so many cartoonists being posted every day that there is no real connection to any of them. I feel
agree.
like anymore. I mean, I
agree.
I mean, I developed an attachment to all of the cartoonists in your generation of cartooning because I was such a huge fan, and I sought out who is this, who is that. But now there's almost too many of them, and they're not posted, not published consistently enough to really develop that attachment.
Elizabeth, I will let you say those things.
I don't know if the right audience is listening to me, but that's how I feel about it.
When I first started out, several times it happened. One example was there was an editorial in the Times by Paul Krugman about a particular political situation. And in it, he quoted and named a writer who said this, and he quoted a writer who said that. And then he wrote, as is shown in a recent New Yorker cartoon, blah, blah, blah. As if he thought the magazine made the cartoon, not an individual cartoonist. And when that happened, it was so irritating. But I think that's changed now. And I think you're right. I think the contest had a lot to do with giving people a sense of who we are as individuals.
Yeah.
Before we leave it, because I got to say, I'm embarrassed to say the man climbing the empty space because it's not there. I don't even know what that means. I don't get that caption.
Because people, okay, well, you're not supposed to explain cartoons, but I'm gonna cartoon explain it for you. People say, why did you do that difficult thing? Because it was there. It's a very common expression, and so this was a play on that because it's not there. Vince, I don't know what to tell
Over
you.
my head. I'm sorry. I'm embarrassed to say it. It's very rare that I don't get a caption, but it bothers me when I don't. So I had to.
Sometimes it's a wall there and you just can't get through it. It's like if you don't know the saying, there's
I
nothing.
guess that's it.
There's nothing there for you.
Yeah, I wish I could help you out, but
What was the most recent one? You haven't had one in a very long time,
You
right?
had one in this last issue or this week's, right?
No, not
No,
in the
I
caption.
mean
in the
Caption
contest.
On the contest.
In the contest.
no, I haven't had a contest in years, many years. Yeah. As I said, that's okay.
Mhm.
It's okay.
Well, I'd like to see more. So hopefully they get one of yours for the contest soon.
Well, why don't you interview Emma and, state my case?
We're trying to.
Yeah, put in a word for us. Do something. We've been trying.
Well, Bob Bankoff also at his cartoon stock, he runs a contest. So, maybe, I don't know if you probably stay in touch with Bob. So maybe you can
I
get in
do.
there. Mhm.
Let me say that for the last 2 or 3 years, I've been writing my memoir, my book
Mhm.
that was published in March. And I just about had enough space, creative space in my life to do that in my weekly submission.
Yeah.
And I haven't explored other avenues in a while because I was engaged in that pretty consistently over the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah,
was
well, let's talk about that. What inspired you to write a memoir?
Well, I started writing these personal history essays for the New Yorker website. And a few of them were about my family. And I began to realize that they had all these stories in my head and I really wanted to tell them. I was daunted by the idea of writing and people saying to me, well, you really need to write a book. And it was daunting to me because I never written anything much longer than a caption, in cartoons, what's so wonderful about them is how fast they are. I mean, you get an idea, you draw it, it's done. And I'm addicted to that. I've been addicted to that my whole life. And I was worried that writing a big project like a book, it didn't seem similar in any way. But what I discovered once I started writing and it got going, that on a good day, the ideas would come like that, but they'd come one after another, not sort of isolated individual ideas. And that once I started realizing that, I really got into writing. And I think of it as a kind of adventure where I don't know what's going to happen. And the stories about my family just kept coming and coming. And then I wrote one draft of the book and I showed it to my first reader, my first critic, and my partner, my wife. And she joked that she had to have 2 therapy sessions to prepare to have the conversation with me, where she told me that, David, it's not funny. And you are a funny person and you need to rethink it. And that's when I started putting the cartoons into the narrative. Because what I had realized in the process of writing it was that there's virtually nothing I've experienced in my life that I haven't made a cartoon about at some point. And so it just kind of made sense to pop in the cartoons where the anecdote required them. And once I got that figured out and the book got funnier, then things went pretty smoothly. So that's how I decided to write the book. I tell you, I never dreamed I would do it, but I did. So
was it therapeutic and emotional? I imagine it would be, kind of going back in your life.
I don't like to say it's therapeutic. I think the book is about my family. And for much of my life, I felt very disconnected from them in a lot of ways, like a lot of us do.
Mhm.
And I'm not going to say they're all gone now, but in the process of writing the book, I realized things about them that not exactly therapeutic, but made me feel closer to my mother, my father, and my sister in a way I hadn't felt before. And that was really good. But mainly it's just, after years of doing one thing, writing a book became as I say, a kind of pleasure. And whether it was therapeutic or not, it really occupied, I'd get on the subway and I'd think about it. I sit down to eat and I think about it. I think about it all the time, and that was very invigorating. I really enjoyed it. Kind of sorry it's over. So,
Do you think you'll do another one? Not a memoir, obviously, but another book, be
I
it
don't know.
fiction or nonfiction?
I'm so right now I'm in that stage, where I'm doing 47 podcasts and
Yeah.
all these other things. And so once that calms down and that's over, I'll give that some thought. So.
That had to be hard because, you probably, might not have written the book had your family still been there to read it. But yet at the same time, it might be nice if they could read it, right? That's got to be such a weird dichotomy that you go through when you're writing a memoir like that.
Well, it's mostly the former. I could never have written my book if any of the three of them were alive. I couldn't have done it because I was pretty honest about everything in the book, and I don't know that they would have understood. So I never even considered that question. I just knew that I had to wait until now.
Yeah.
And it opened up to very good reviews. So congratulations. I'm sure that was satisfying to
it's great, really great, totally great. I still have to pinch myself. Really great.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I like to ask, do you have a cartoon that you think you're most known for? One of your most populars?
Well, the most popular cartoon, the most reprinted and stolen and everything cartoon is the one I did of the couple walking down the street, and the woman is saying to the man, my desire to be well informed is currently at odds with my desire to remain sane. And that cartoon, every time the world goes to hell, like it is right now, it just explodes on the internet. Because again, it does speak to something we're all feeling. And so I think that's why it works so well. That's by far my most popular cartoon.
And was that a daily cartoon?
Yeah. Like everyone, my cat, that wasn't a New Yorker cartoon. I did that in the mid 90s. I can't even remember who I did it for. But it's always been my most popular.
Wow.
Wow. I assume that was a Trump cartoon.
No. That I did that, I think, during the Bosnia crisis back in the 90s.
Wow.
So yeah.
Yeah. As you said, there's always something that comes along that refreshes that. It's just hate it that happens, but there you go.
I know.
The more things change, the more they stay the same, right?
Exactly. Oh, I could use that in a caption, actually.
There you go.
You probably could.
You always have that cartoon switch on.
Cartoon brain working.
Yes. Yes. Well, I love your one that's the wife is angry at the husband and she's sitting on the couch and he's saying to her, well, it doesn't matter who's right. If it doesn't matter who's right or who's wrong, why don't I be right and you be wrong? I think every married couple in the world can relate to that.
That's a popular cartoon, and there is a story behind that, which is that I was having an actual argument with my wife, and at one point she saw my eyes kind of wander, and she said, "You're not thinking up a cartoon right now, are you?" "Oh no, absolutely not, absolutely not." And then a few weeks later, she opened the magazine, and there it was. So
you were.
You could say, "Oh, I sold that years ago. They just
years ago." Yeah.
That one's great.
No, the one I like is the one with the boy at the blackboard who's writing math equations, and it's it may be wrong, but it's how I feel.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's
one,
me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's most of us.
Yeah. Well,
I'm getting a message that my internet is unstable. Are you guys having any problems with me?
Sound okay.
No, we're okay.
Okay.
I think you're
good.
Good.
Yeah.
It's just you, I guess.
My
I'm
absolute 100%.
You are unstable.
You're unstable. You could use that in a cartoon too. It's
Believe me, I'm writing that one down.
It's not your internet, it's you. My absolute favorite of your cartoons, and Paul will probably tell me to keep this PG, but my absolute favorite one of your cartoons is a couple sitting at a restaurant and the man has food in his mouth, and the wife says, "Leave room for sex." Do you remember that one?
Yeah.
It's
Leave room
hysterical.
for sex.
Leave
Yeah.
room for sex.
Thank you.
Oh my God, that is so
That was
funny.
perfectly fine. I like that.
I'm
Okay,
keeping it
good.
PG. I'm keeping it PG, but that one.
They were eating, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
They were eating barbecue, which is a
Mhm.
choice that I made because I thought it was like the sloppiest food I could imagine.
Do you have a favorite of your own? One that you
Well, the
personal
the
favorite? of
bad
yours?
drawing one is a favorite, but I think my favorite cartoon, the one I feel really great about is the two people the guy standing in the subway station, and the announcer is saying, "Due to an incident at the Bergen Street station, everything has changed and nothing will ever be the same." And I like that cartoon a lot because for me, that was my 9/11 cartoon. And I don't know, I just love that cartoon. I can't really explain it. I also like some of my torture chamber cartoons, like the pathetic prisoner being brought into the torture chamber, and there are two hooded torturers at the rack, and one of them saying to the other, "Don't forget to call it a procedure, makes it less scary,"
Mhm.
which was inspired by an upcoming doctor's appointment. So
That's great.
Here's a
I'm
question
just-
for you. We're getting a little bit off the subject here, but you did a podcast with Ken Levine a few weeks ago.
yeah,
In the middle of that, he said something about he would have wanted you to have you on staff to help him write some of the shows he was doing. And you had said that you didn't know how to do that and you wouldn't have been very good. But he said, "I could have taught you that. I can't teach humor." And
Yeah.
that kind of struck me. Is that something where, can you teach humor? Can you teach somebody to be funny? What do you think about that?
that's a really good question. I've taught a little cartooning over the years, once or twice. I did a stint at my college at one point. And what I would say about that is that sometimes if people involve themselves in the process, if these kids, once they started getting into the drawing and the trying to come up with ideas, they discovered that they were pretty funny. I don't think you can just say people, I don't think you can show people how to be funny, but you can involve them in the process of writing or drawing or whatever, and they may discover a funny part of themselves. I don't think there's such a thing as a person who's not funny deep down. Maybe Vladimir Putin, but I believe that. Well, I don't know. That's my answer. It's not very satisfying.
There's something there. It just has to be discovered. Is kind of what you're saying. You know, there's everybody has it. Just you need to find it, I guess.
Well, and everybody depends on it. You know, if you can't laugh at some of the shit that goes on in your life, you can't survive it. You know, so I think everybody, if they don't have it, they should. So,
yeah, it's for some reason when I heard him say that, I thought of the scene in Good Morning Vietnam where Lieutenant Hulk said, "In my heart, I know I'm funny." So, but he was something that was just painfully not funny. So I was just, I was wondering, is there people who can be taught to be funny who are not funny? Is that something that's possible to do?
I really don't know. I
know.
really don't know.
Yeah, it's
I
just,
feel bad for those people.
yeah, it's like there's got to be something there. You just have to find it.
You know, I live in Brooklyn Heights in Brooklyn, and I have a studio in Dumbo, which is about 15 minutes away. And I've always needed to work somewhere different than where I live. It's just really important to me. And every day when I walk out the door in the morning off to my studio, my wife, who will then later go to her work, says, "Be funny." And so that's my job.
Wow. Why
That's
do
a lot
you
of pressure.
why do you feel that's necessary? That's a big expense to rent out a space in
Well, Vince,
Dumbo.
it goes
Dumbo's-
back to my father. I somehow never have gotten over the residual guilt I feel about not having a serious job. And somehow, if I get up in the morning and leave home and go to the office, I fool myself into thinking I have a real job. And I know it's ridiculous, but that's really important to me. Also, I think if I worked at home, I'd never stop working. You know, it's nice to end the day and come home, have a vodka, and go on a podcast with you guys. I need that break, or else I would never stop doing what I do.
Yeah. Is the process just going into that studio with coffee, sitting down and seeing what you got?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, as I say, the last 2.5, 3 years, I've been doing mostly writing.
Yeah.
And my cartooning has come down to basically Monday and Tuesday mornings for the deadline. But yeah, that's it. It's just sort of, as I said before, it's often a kind of meditation, you know, just I think about what I've experienced, what happened to the restaurant last night, what I overheard, what I saw in the newspaper, and that's where the ideas come from.
Do you sell anywhere? Are you even submitting anywhere other than the New Yorker nowadays?
I was for a while. I was selling to airmail
Yeah.
for a while, but honestly, like I said, I haven't, the last couple of years, I haven't paid much attention to anything else except the writing and the New Yorker. I'll start again now, start looking around, I think, but 10 ideas a week was about all I had going. And what's funny is I'm really hesitant to send the rejected ideas anywhere else, because I swear to God, half of my rejections are the cartoons that I resell when I resubmit them. So I'm being kind of careful not to waste them anywhere else until I'm absolutely sure that she doesn't want them.
Right. Have you ever been in the rejection collection? Or contacted to be part of that?
I'm very much part of it. Yeah. In fact, there's a hilarious video that Matt Diffie made. I don't know if you guys would be able to see it. I can actually send it to you. And it was to promote the second edition of the Rejection Collection. And it's a bunch of cartoonists, Sam Gross, Roz Chast, Paul Noth, Matt, me, and Marissa, I can't remember. Anyway, we're sitting around in a therapy session. I played the psychiatrist, and I ask people what they're feeling, and they start complaining about Bob. And Sam says something like, "Sometimes I could just kill him." And then the door opens and Bob walks into the therapy session. "Hi, everybody, how you doing?" And it ends with Roz beating him to death with a baseball bat.
Wow, that got dark.
Oh my God.
Absolutely hilarious. And that was a promotional video for the second edition of the Rejection Collection. And there's a new edition coming out, not with new stuff, but coming out very soon.
Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to that.
When you say not with new stuff?
I think it's just a redo. Matt didn't ask us for anything new. I think he's just it's just a new edition with the same stuff. Maybe stuff has been rejiggered or something like that. I don't know. So,
well, we had for almost an hour. I know we got on a little later than you wanted, so I won't keep you too much longer. I am just curious. I know you said you taught cartoons for a while. Are you aware if your students ever went on to sell a cartoon anywhere?
No, the main teaching I did was at Williams College, where I went to college, and those kids were not going to be cartoonists. They had far more expansive dreams of their future, but they really enjoyed it, and they got something out of it. They got to think in a way that they weren't used to thinking in. You know, kids in a high pressure institution like that, you're always trying to do, everything has to be right. Nothing can be wrong. And right and wrong don't really work in cartoons. It's not about that. It's not about getting the right answer. And I try to get them to free associate and think a little out of the box. And I think maybe that changed them a little, but no, none of them went on to being cartoonists. No.
I have one more question. Do you sell your originals? Do you have them
I do.
anywhere for sale? Are they?
Yeah, I mean,
Mhm.
are they affordable?
Well, I know pretty much the range that
Yeah,
that the originals are selling for. So, yeah, so you could contact you through your website, people that are interested in that.
absolutely. And I now sell them myself. We used to sell them through the Cartoon Bank, but now I just there's many of them are still archived at Condé Nast, but when someone wants one, I get it from there. And so yeah.
Great. Good
Yeah,
to
we'll
know.
put your website link in the show notes.
Thank you. Thank you. It was my first I didn't have a website until I started writing the book. And so
Oh, wow.
Now I do.
It's a good website. Yeah, whoever did
Thank
it
you.
did a very good job.
She did a great job. They earned their
Yeah.
large fee. Yes.
Well, hopefully you'll get a nice return on that investment.
No, it's already been great. It's great
Mhm.
to have a place where you can tell people everything. So
Mhm.
I've listed, as I said, all 47 podcasts there. So,
Oh.
and you
That's
guys are up
fantastic.
next.
We appreciate you
Fantastic.
taking the time to do it. I know you've done a lot lately, and this
It's
was
been
great.
fun. Yeah, it's been really fun. And I echo, as I said, I listened today and I listened to Ben's interview and what he said at the end about it being great to talk to people who know this sort of from the inside. It really, really makes for a good conversation. So thank you.
Yeah. Well,
Thank you,
I
David.
know we are big fans, so thank you so much.
Okay, guys, is that it? Are we checking out?
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
All
Thank
righty.
you.
that's it. Thanks a lot. Have a great
Okay.
night.
You too.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.